Hello and welcome to It's a Code U, mental health support for those working in healthcare. This is a podcast created for healthcare employees to explore not only issues relating to mental and emotional health, but also unique challenges that those working in healthcare are faced with. Your hosts are Adina Tucker, a licensed clinical social worker with Dartmouth Health, and Jennifer Hinsey, an MSW also with Dartmouth Health. Welcome back to It's a Code U. We are actually repurposing an episode that aired last year on reducing the risk of child sexual abuse. So please listen and be warned that this is sensitive information. And so just be mindful when listening to this episode. April is Child Abuse Prevention Month. So the topic we'd like to discuss today is child sexual abuse. What is it? How prevalent is it? And most importantly, how do we protect our kids and the kids we love and care about from it? So, just to give some information, just some background, child sexual abuse is when a child age 0 to 17 is involved in sexual activity that gives either sexual gratification or monetary gain to the perpetrator. This can include both touching behaviors and non touching behaviors, such as exposing children to sexually explicit material or other exploitive activities. There is no race or socioeconomic group that is immune or protected from child sexual abuse. 91% of children who are sexually abused are abused by someone the child or the child's family knows. And this is from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So, growing up in the 80s, we were told there's a man in a van with candy. That's not really who you have to worry about. It's the people that you trust, that you allow to spend time with your child. It's also why it's the most underreported abuse, but it's also why it can be the most damaging because there is that level of trust there that's then violated. Let's also briefly look at how child sexual abuse affects the mental health of the child throughout their life. Those who experience child sexual abuse are more likely to experience disorders such as depression, anxiety, and PTSD. And there have been many studies that look at the long-term psychological impact of sexual abuse. A 2019 research review in the Lancet Psychiatry Journal looked at research from over 4 million people, and they found that those who experience child sexual abuse are between 2 to 3 times more likely to suffer from the following disorders compared to those adults who were not abused. And that's borderline personality disorder, depression, anxiety, PTSD, and eating disorders. It is also strongly linked to both drug and alcohol use. Child sexual abuse survivors are also 2.5 times more likely to make a suicide attempt. Child sexual abuse effects can take years to develop, as it's suspected that the abuse during developmental years actually alters brain structure and chemistry. And there have also been extensive documentation of the negative social consequences of child sexual abuse. It impacts relationships, including breakups and divorce as you're older, overall dissatisfaction with relationships in general, and increased sexual dysfunction as an adult. Those who survive child sexual abuse endure lifelong consequences, and what we know is that the best we can do is offer support and services to those who have experienced it while doing our best to become educated so we can prevent future abuse before it happens.
And Adina, this is such an important topic because unfortunately it's a very prevalent problem, but I think it also thrives because it thrives in shame and silence around it, and kids being scared to speak about it, and adults maybe not being sure how to address it if it does come up. And of course, we know that many children who have experienced sexual abuse, they do show those behavioral and emotional changes, but also many others do not. So it's critical to focus not only the detection of it, but on how to prevent it, how to communicate about it by teaching kids about body safety and healthy body boundaries, and by encouraging open communication about different sexual matters. And so we know that what we teach our children about their bodies and sexuality can help. But the problem with the concept, I think adults are very familiar with teaching kids the good touch, bad touch. concept that's been taught for a really long time. Yeah, it's teaching children to be in control of stopping abuse from occurring, but at the same time, we're teaching them to hug and kiss relatives that maybe they don't want to. And most abusers are people that they in fact do love and trust. It's more likely not a random stranger hiding somewhere in the bushes at the park. It's someone that they know. It's in their circle, in their family circle. So if children aren't taught bodily autonomy, the whole good touch, bad touch thing can be really confusing for them. And it increases disclosures, but it doesn't actually go to the prevention part. So if we teach children about sexuality and bodily autonomy from an early age, then what we're giving them is control over their bodies. And we're helping them feel more empowered that they can choose who they want to hug and kiss. They will feel more empowered that they can choose who they want to hug and kiss. And even if it's their favorite aunt or grandma, they won't feel obligated to accept different physical touch, hugs, kisses, whatever, if they're not feeling comfortable with it. And even if the adult gets their feelings hurt over it, they're taught to figure out their own boundaries and what they feel good with from an early age and have that control over their own bodies. Children who have bodily autonomy are also more likely to report sexual abuse to their parents, or possibly even grooming behavior that makes them uncomfortable. The way we start teaching bodily autonomy is by starting conversations about sexuality and our sexual parts from a very early age with kids. And so here's a good way you could do it. Teach your children from a very young age their different body parts, in addition to maybe head, shoulders, knees, and toes. So, for example, during your toddler's bath time, we're going over the different body parts, but also identify the penis, vagina, and anus. These are all of their body parts. We all have them, and it will allow them to learn what they are without shame or feeling like they are bad parts to talk about with you. Teach your children body part rules. It's about teaching them who can look or touch their private parts and when. So, for example, if their parent is bathing them or changing their diaper, if they are at the doctor and their parents are present, these are all okay moments. And that it's okay to say no to being touched by anyone. That includes mom and dad. Includes tickling, hugging, kissing, any kind of touching. And back it up. Don't get upset if your 2-year-old says, no, they do not want a goodnight kiss. And thank them for telling you how they feel and that they don't want to be touched in that way. If you're tickling your child and they say stop or no, immediately stop. This is also a great way to introduce the concept of consent to your kids too. And the earlier that concept is taught, the more empowered your child is to protect their own bodies as well. Some secrets are okay, like a surprise birthday party, but other secrets should always be shared with mom or dad. And these are just examples of different rules you should go over regularly with your kids, reinforce, make it a point to bring them up and address them often.
I did this with my own kids. We went over the correct names for body parts. And then when my son was a toddler, he would usually ask me, he'd be like, this is Mrs. So and so, she's got a vagina, right? Like just making sure I've got this, whatever. But it was very important to me. I have a background working with child victims of sexual abuse, doing therapy and group therapy, and also I worked at a sexual assault center doing forensic interviews for a while too. So I really wanted to approach this from the right way. So we even had body part rules printed out, and I would go over them and we'd put them on the fridge. And then, like, sometimes I would just quiz them, like, you don't have to hug somebody you don't want to, right? Yeah, we know. But I always wanted them to know that they were in charge of their own body. So, child sexual abuse affects someone on every level and it stays with them the rest of their lives. There are also health risks that come from a history of child sexual abuse, such as heart disease, obesity, cancer, depression, PTSD, we've mentioned, and then substance abuse. And the list goes on and on. So, just some little factoids about the prevalence. So, 1 in every 4 female children and 1 in every 13 male children will experience some form of child sexual abuse in their lifetime. Abusers are almost always someone the child knows. This could be a family member, distant relatives, friends, teachers, coaches, babysitters. It is someone that you know and trust with your child most often of the time. Children will also usually not disclose the abuse, and if they do, it may take them a long time to do it. They also may not tell their parents. So, as you're teaching your child these things, making sure they know it's okay and encourage them to speak to other safe adults is that's going to be a key component, because you don't want them to feel guilty about not coming to you. It's a very sensitive thing to open up about. Also, don't take it personally. There's a lot of mixed emotions when a child is sexually abused, and sometimes the abuser will keep the child silent by telling them the parent's going to be angry with them or upset with them. Many children also will not show signs of being harmed. They may also ask to continue to see their abuser because of the level of love and trust that is there despite the abuse. It's a very complex issue. Some signs of stress that can be an indicator of child sexual abuse are if they're withdrawing from their family and friends, if they're struggling in school, if they're showing a lot of anger and depression, having nightmares or extreme fears all of a sudden, if you find them avoiding certain adults. So let's take a look at how to recognize the signs that another adult is grooming your child for sexual abuse. This is actually the best way to prevent, is to recognize behaviors in other adults and then also calling them out for it or making changes. So, grooming is when an adult or older child begins to test boundaries with a child and manipulate before any abuse actually occurs. The sexual abuser will try to pass off inappropriate behaviors as normal or no big deal. And usually this happens over a long period of time, and it's a process. But some red flags that someone is grooming another person for sexual abuse are asking to keep the relationship a secret, making suggestive or sexual comments, asking someone about their sexual background, sending links to suggestive images, memes, or porn, using only certain apps for contact, chatting only at certain times when others are not around, setting conditions on the relationship, as such as demanding things like photos, sending unexpected gifts. And the whole purpose of grooming is to try to obtain a willing participant in the abusive relationship, because that's going to reduce the likelihood that the victim is going to either disclose or stop the abuser from continuing the abuse. Other reasons for grooming include manipulating perceptions of people around the intended victim. So, if they may try to poison the child's view of their parents or someone else so that they start to feel that this person is the main person they should trust.
That's great information. More than 80% of sexual abuse incidents happen in isolated one on one situations with a child. It's important to choose group situations and have multiple adults supervising. Be aware and scan the environment for hidden areas and correct any dangers you might see. Make sure interactions can be both observed and interrupted if needed. And it's important to remember that older youth shouldn't be in any isolated or one on one situations with really young children. In fact, 23% of reported cases of child sexual abuse are perpetrated by individuals under the age of 18. And while some degree of sexual curiosity and exploration is to be expected between kids of about the same age, when one child coerces another to engage in adult like sexual activities, that behavior is definitely unhealthy and abusive. It's important to ask for and suggest best practices both in schools and community organizations that your children attend. Things like background checks, in person interviews for new hires and volunteers who are going to be working with your kids, personal and professional reference checks, a code of contact for any staff and volunteers, a policy that covers any disclosures or concerns of child sexual abuse, a policy that addresses inappropriate behavior, breaches in policy and suspicions of abuse, prevention training for employees, volunteers, parents, and caregivers, everyone who's going to be interacting with your child. And it's 100% okay to address the school or whatever activity it is that your kid is getting involved in and even demand that these things be done for the safety of your child. Behaviors you should watch out for when adults are with children include problems that come up in personal space. So, does this person make others uncomfortable by ignoring basic social, emotional, or physical boundaries or limits? Do they refuse to let a child set their own limits or use teasing or belittling to keep the child from setting that limit? Do they insist on different forms of touch like hugging, touching, kissing, tickling, wrestling, or holding a child even though the child might not want that physical contact? Do they walk in on teens and children who are using the bathroom? I think it's important for parents to keep in mind that when it comes to perpetrators, it's not necessarily going to be you walk in and they are in the actual act of sexually touching your child. There are many instances of grooming behaviors that lead up to that point. And so if you're getting a gut feeling or you're getting a indication that something's just not right here in what you're seeing, my child is asking to be put down or not tickled and the adult is insisting that they keep touching them, take note of that and consider limiting the kid's contact with that adult. Trust your gut. When it comes to relationships with children, does this person turn to a child for emotional or physical comfort by sharing really personal or private information that's usually more appropriate for adult ears? Do they have secret interactions with teens or kids, or spend excessive time emailing, texting, or calling the kids? Even spending time on a kid's social media account or something and reaching out through maybe video games. Do they insist on or manage to spend uninterrupted time alone with a child? Do they seem too good to be true? So, for example, they frequently offer to babysit different children for free, frequently taking kids on special outings alone, buying the kids gifts, or giving them money for no reason. So, outside of birthdays or holidays or something. Do they allow the children or teens to consistently get away with inappropriate behaviors? Are they not actually upholding healthy boundaries when it comes to the kids? Sexual conversations or behaviors include: do they frequently point out sexual images or tell dirty or suggestive jokes with the kids present? Do they expose a child to adult interactions or images without any concern for what the kids are viewing? Are they overly interested in the sexuality or maybe sexual behaviors of a particular child or teen? And one of the things I like to kind of relate to this category of things to look out for: if this person is engaging in behavior that you know at your own workplace would fall under professional misconduct with adults, like making dirty, suggestive jokes to other adults or bringing a pornographic image and showing it to your workplace break room, then be mindful that this person, even if they're a trusted family member, they're a zany uncle, or a good friend of the family, if it wouldn't fly even at your own work amongst adults, then it's really not a good idea that you allow this sort of behavior to be perpetrated on your own children. So I just kind of like that as a little litmus test.
No, I agree. I think the other thing too is that something just in my previous work is I've had a parent say to me, "Well, I didn't want to say something and be wrong." Be wrong. I would rather someone
Yeah.
risk, you know, something seeming off because the thing is
hmm
we talk to kids when we're talking to kids about sexual abuse and all these things, we talk about the uh-oh feeling. And it's that feeling in the pit of your stomach when you're like something feels
hmm
off. And as adults, we tend to learn to ignore
Yes.
that. Like, oh, I'm just anxious about this other thing or whatever. Like
Yes.
this person would never do something. I mean, no. If you
Yeah.
get that feeling or something's it
hmm
seems off, I would say risk being uncomfortable and risk being wrong and just make a change or point it out or confront the
Mm-hmm.
person depending on what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it goes back to just that clear, open communication about what is wrong, what is uncomfortable, and what is violating. So, I mean, like we said at the beginning, this is a problem that thrives in silence. So,
Absolutely. And, one thing that's also interesting that I've also, seen a lot personally in work, but also you see it in the research is that you will oftentimes see like a child come forward and say, like, this relative did this to me. And then through their treatment and through their, if
mm,
law enforcement is involved, all of a sudden
yes.
you start seeing sometimes older children coming forward and
Yeah.
saying, well, this also happened to me with this person, and it's like an entire kind of lineage of people who, it
Mm,
just took that one kid who had like the right mix of feeling safe enough or whatever it was to finally say, like,
yeah.
this is happening to me, and then through that all these other people come forward. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really it's a lot more prevalent than I think people think. And the complicated thing about this issue is that
Mm-hmm.
there is not just shame for the child, there's also shame for the
Yeah.
adult family members who find out about it. And a lot of times I think that's why it
Mm-hmm.
gets swept under the rug. And they're like, well,
Right.
we're just not going to report this because it's a family. We'll put things into place. And the problem with that is that then this person is able to
Right.
not get any consequences for their behavior, but also possibly
Yeah.
go on to abuse other people. So it's a really
Mm-hmm.
tricky, complicated situation full of a lot of shame and other things when I mean, which is so unfortunate because the only person who should feel any kind of shame is the person who's doing the perpetrating.
Yeah, exactly.
So the things that Jennifer went over are things you should be paying attention to. Just keep an eye out for with the adults that are around your children. And if you've seen signs of abuse in a child, or you've even just witnessed some of those boundary violations by either an adult or an older youth, don't worry about hurting the adult's feelings or being wrong. At a minimum, set some limits or just ask some questions. The way you can do that is describe to the person what the inappropriate behavior or boundary violation was. So it looks like you're forcing Timmy to hug and kiss you, and he looks uncomfortable. And then you could set a limit. Please stop trying to hug Timmy. We let him decide who he wants to show affection to, or just simply move on. Hey, Timmy, let's go over here and see what everybody else is doing and remove them from the situation. But if you see a pattern of these behaviors, it is time to report your suspicions to police or child protective services. And child protective services is there to investigate it. It's impossible for someone in the general public to have access to all the things. And as long as you make a good faith report, I mean, I always feel like I would rather be wrong than be right and have not done anything. If your child or any
Mm-hmm.
child discloses sexual abuse to you, understand that this is an extreme act of bravery that required the child to look past secrecy, shame, fear, and they have chosen you as the person that is trusted to tell. So pay attention to what they're saying, have compassion, and believe them. Also, listen calmly and openly. Don't fill in the gaps or rush to get to the bottom of the situation. Definitely don't ask any leading questions about details. Ask only open ended questions like what happened next or can you tell me more? Make sure that you believe the child, but you also communicate to them that you believe them and tell them they have done nothing wrong. Let them know how brave and courageous they are and how much you appreciate them trusting you with that information. And then seek the help of a professional who is trained to speak with children about sexual abuse. You can contact your local sexual assault center, child protective services. The one thing you want to make sure that you don't do is, you know, eh, not ask a ton of questions, but definitely not leading questions, because what's going to probably happen is this child is going to be interviewed by someone who is trained in forensic interviewing. And the purpose of that is generally so that if it does actually get prosecuted, that will avoid the child having to be in court in that interview because it is observed by law enforcement, kind of protects that child from that, or it in most cases is supposed to. So anything that you say that could, kind of cause any sort of question as to, well, did so and so tell you that happened or is that what really happened? Just listen, 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 and then, whatever they tell you, pass that along, but then, just try not to fill any gaps or lead in any way. The National Sexual Violence Resource Center has a ton of information on their website. We'll put the link in the show description. You can go to www.nsvrc.org and find all sorts of presentations for parents, flyers you can post, and other things to help you, guidelines for, team sports and other things like that. The other thing that I wrote down that I wanted to just kind of come back to as well as we kind of like just close up is that there is, as you mentioned, like quite a high number of older children that are juvenile perpetrators. And the thing to remember that is there is some level of, kids who play doctor that is like normal development, but usually it should be no more than like a year or two gap in ages. And the other thing to remember is that a lot of times, while this does not make it
Mm-hmm.
okay, a lot of
Yeah.
times the
Mm-hmm.
juvenile who is doing the perpetrating probably was a victim at some point themselves and has not had any treatment or disclosed to anyone or had anything like that. It's really kind of a really sad situation for everyone involved when that happens. But again, that's the more we can pay attention to these things and be willing to call
Mm-hmm.
them out, and the better it's going to be.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. When it involves a juvenile perpetrator, if you're seeing, things like the large age gap, if you're seeing things like coercion taking place in those sexual interactions, yeah, it's really sad. It's also an opportunity to get both the victim in this case and that child who's offending the help that they need. Yeah, and I would just say there's no guarantee. We can't guarantee 100% our kids' protection. It's just not possible. But there are a lot of things that we can do to limit the prevalence and the exposure to child sexual abuse. And like I said earlier, it's a problem that breeds in secrecy. Just simply speaking about it openly and publicly can help with that prevention piece. And it's just why it's so critically important to educate our children. They need to know that their bodies belong to them, that they don't have to go along with everything an adult tells them to do. It's important to teach them the proper names of their genitals. We've got to encourage them to feel comfortable talking to parents about their bodies without feeling embarrassment, and teaching them what kind of touching is okay and that they can say no. And, just because someone is a close relative or a dear friend of the family, if they don't feel comfortable, they can say no.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think the whole again, like the more, and I think it's the same with anything when it comes to sexual development, not just, like acts of sexual violence or abuse, is that
Hmm.
that open conversation with your child is going
Yes.
to create a level of trust and really feeling ownership over their own
Hmm.
body, but also it's a great way to also work in consent as well, so that as they age, as they get in dating
Yes.
relationships, like they feel
Hmm.
confident in standing up for themselves or not accepting less than they deserve, all those kinds of things.
Well, I was going to say, I feel like that really goes to the family dynamics where, oh, it's easier to kind of shove it away, brush it under the rug. Well, that just happened that one time, and so, it was a little kid. They're older now, like it's fine. It doesn't matter if a decade has gone by and the last that you have known of this person, this relative, this whatever, abusing a child, it doesn't matter. and kids need to continue to be protected and not placed in environments where someone there's that potential for harm to them.
And the other thing that I was going to say is that, if your child were to disclose to you, there's treatment, treatment, treatment. Like, don't wait till they're older. The earlier you can get them support and treatment after disclosure, the better outcomes they're going to have. But also, sometimes family
Hmm.
therapy is necessary, because sometimes the relationship with the
Yeah.
family has been damaged because of
Yeah.
what the perpetrator has
Yes.
told
Yeah.
the child, or because the whole point is to groom this child into, I am the only trusted adult. And so therefore now I can manipulate this child and do whatever I want to. And they're going to feel that like their parents don't really love them or they can't trust them, all these things. And so sometimes that is damaged because of the manipulation from the perpetrator.
Mhm.
So I would say even parents, get your own therapy, because you're going to have your own feelings
Yeah.
of possibly guilt or whatever. And the people who do this are
Mhm.
very skilled manipulators. There's also research that shows that once someone has been sexually abused, they're that much likely for it to happen again with someone else. And it's because like these people who perpetrate
Mhm.
on people like that, they have like some sort of special sense to see that this person has been through something. And so
Mhm.
they might be an easier person to attach themselves to. So that's why everybody get treatment, everybody get
Mhm.
therapy. It's very helpful. It can help heal
Mhm.
not just the individuals, but the family unit as well.
Right. Yeah. 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 Sexual predators definitely seek out victims who are vulnerable because there is that less likely chance that they are going to tell anyone about it, or so that secrecy and that shame, it thrives. And it made me think of too how typically when a sexual predator, whether they prey on children or adults, by the time, if they ever are, discovered and held accountable for that one victim, they have perpetrated against a multitude of victims up to that point. So it's rarely ever just one. And so even if, oh, it was just this one time a decade ago, no, you can't count that. That is a fallacy. It is multitudes, and it's a matter of time catching up when it's finally discovered, revealed, finally talked about. But trimming down this length of time, this passage of time that passes because everybody's hiding a secret or is too uncomfortable to talk about it, well, that's why we need to encourage kids to have these healthy boundaries and be able to speak openly and freely about the things that are going on with them.
And I think it's important for both boys and girls for different reasons,
Yes.
because girls are, I feel like, conditioned to accept certain behaviors because that's just the way it is,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
so especially if someone, if a female becomes a victim of child sexual abuse or sexual assault, they may be less likely to report the second or third time because they're just like,
Right.
well, this is just happening to me again. And
Mm-hmm.
the more you have those early conversations where you really have them confident in their body autonomy and consent and
Yeah.
all those things, the less likely that societal message of, well, as a
Mm.
woman, there are just certain things you're going to have to accept because that's just the way things
Right.
are. And then
Mm-hmm.
alternatively for boys, there's that whole masculine message of we don't talk about feelings and we don't do, and it's
Yeah.
like, and so there's this massive amount of
Mm-hmm.
shame when it happens to boys, because it's like this
Mm-hmm.
whole idea that's perpetrated of, well, if you're a boy, you should have been able to stop it or like whatever. And it's unhelpful and untrue. So it really just
Yeah. Yeah.
negatively affects both boys and girls in very different ways. And so just
Mm-hmm.
again, like the more we can talk openly with
Yeah.
our kids and the more we can hold other adults accountable for things that they should not be doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One, two, yeah, you bring up something really important too when we're talking the difference between male and female victims, right? Children. With boys, often that shame piece comes up because of their genitalia, they can have a response that they're not able to control. They're internalizing shame because they're responding to this abuse in a maybe perceivably pleasurable or positive way. So that there's a lot of that, I think, wrapped up in the secrecy of it and not wanting to talk about it and internalizing, well, I must be an active participant because I had a response. I had an orgasm from this abuse, right? And I've read some about that before. And also too, the way our culture holds up maybe what is considered bad in terms of sexual abuse of children, which it's horrific.
No, you bring up a good point because that is part of the complexity of the abuse is that I mean, not all of it feels bad
Yeah.
to boys or girls. It's a physiological response to something happening. And so that's part of what kind of makes everything very
Yeah.
muddy in your brain
Hmm.
as as that happens to someone to to a child is because this feels uncomfortable. I'm not asking for this. I don't want this. However, it's just it's such a mixed bag and that's where that shame comes into it where it's like,
Hmm. And perpetrators will use that against the victim too. Oh, but it
yep.
seems like you're enjoying this. So is it really wrong?
Mhm.
You're a part of it, right? So yeah,
Yeah, no, for sure. It's and that's why we have to do a better job of protecting our children because I mean it is
for
actually
sure.
scary how much it's underreported.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it is. And you know what? And just like what we've been talking about, scariest of all is the number of adults who had a weird feeling, right? Who saw something, who, I don't know, had some kind of gut feeling about it, or their kid maybe made an offhand remark that was like, what's that about? Trying, like, in their attempt to maybe speak to it, and, or maybe their kid who directly told them, or something. And the amount of brushing under the rug that occurs, and also because of who the perpetrator is to the adult. Well, this is my brother. This was grandma, right? This was our dear friend from church. This is our pastor. Of course not, right?
Yeah.
The amount of believing the adults over kids and what kids are experiencing at the hands of the adults. I really I think it taps into what those parents, what their own experience being abused was, and also just not being comfortable. Well, we've already talked about this, but just not being comfortable addressing the hard truths, the potential for really hard, difficult truth, and the fallout from that. So,
Yeah, no, I agree.
yeah, yeah,
So I'll put the resources in the show description with some links in case any of that is helpful or you want to take a look at any of the educational pieces to either share with someone or just for more information for yourself. And thank you all for listening and we hope that this has been helpful. Thank you for joining us this week. As always, if you'd like more information and support, please check out our site at dartmouth-health.cobalt.care for additional content, connection to resources, support groups that you can sign up to attend, or to connect to one of our clinicians for counseling, psychotherapy, or medication evaluation. We appreciate you listening and hope you have a wonderful week.